Hi, can you hear me? Yes? All right, thanks. Hello, and thank you for having me here today. I'm very much excited because this is my first talk and my first ever security research. So today we're going to talk about brute forcing malware, and specifically for WordPress. And the reason why is that 28% of internet is running WordPress. So it's around 20 million sites out there. It's a really big pool for hackers. So we decided to do the research and to find out what kind of malware is out there and doing the brute forcing. So any one of you who have ever done research of any kind, probably familiar with these infographics. This is the emotional ups and downs of doing the research of any kind. So you started with a great idea, it's like you're excited, and then you modify it a little bit, and then, not something works, something not, and then in the end you're in this green area where there's happy unicorns, you are, ready to share the results that you found out. So I'm here today to share with you what we found out during the research that we did with a colleague of mine, and I think it's time to introduce people who were doing the research. So my name is Anna, and together with Veronica, who is the co-author of this research, we are doing this threat research in Cisco, in particular in cognitive threat analytics. This is the group within Cisco which is applying machine learning algorithms to identify malicious behaviors and anomalies in the network. So our job is to look at the data. We are looking at the data all day long, and specifically on the network traffic, and that's what we do. It's fun. Before we get started, I'd like to thank people who were participating in this research. I'd like to say thank you to Sebastian Garcia for providing datasets. We are going to release all datasets of Satterbot on the stratosphere.org. I put the link there at the end as well, so you can search for Satterbot there if you are interested. And the second person I'd like to say thank you is Jindrich Karasik. He created the visualization of the CNCs of Satterbot that I will show you later. So let's define the goal of this talk. Today we're going to talk about three things. We are going to cover the historical overview of brute forcing malware, so to understand how big the problem is. The second, we are going to present a deep dive on the Trojan called Satterbot. And the third, we will discuss some detection methods and why this is important. We are not going to talk today about the binary reversing. There are several reasons why. First, it was done already before by other researchers, so we didn't want to repeat it. And second, we are focusing on the network traffic in particular, and by running malware on the long term. So we are mostly focusing on malware behavior, let's say. And we are not going to cover all possible malware which is doing brute forcing because it's a lot, and we just don't have time for it. So brute force attacks are not something new. They exist for quite a while, and usually hackers are trying to break authentication to get an access to the administration panel. So content management systems rely on authentication, and WordPress in particular rely on the form-based authentication method where a user needs to put their username and password to log in. So there are two types. There's like vp/login.php, and another possible variant to use XML RPC call, but it was not designed for authentication, but you can use the username and the password to log in. So brute forcing, this is the most common types of attack against content management systems. The main goal of it is to get access to the administration login panel. Attackers are taking an advantage of the fact that users are using simple passwords as QWERTY or 12345, root 123, and sometimes they don't even change the password at all. So when the site is hacked, it usually becomes spreading other malware or getting sold on the black market. So it's never ending on the, let's say, on the hacked side. It usually have a continuation. So to understand the scale of the problem, I'd like to present you the historical overview, and we're going to talk about some of the malware that happened during the different times of year in the history. So 2009 brought us the first record of the distributing brute forcing attack. And I need to remind you that the WordPress was found in 2003, and I'm sure there were different attempts to brute force it, but the first distributing brute forcing attack was reported in 2009. At least we were able to find it. So if you have other data, please share. So there was the small PHP script, which was found by the user on his private VPS server. The script was getting around 200 URLs and then the second value of the password and tried to brute force it. This was published on the Sense blog post, so when we release the slides, you can go ahead and check all the links out there. I put it for you. Then during the 2010 up to 2012, there are other events happen, including the hacking of WordPress. But we are mostly interested in 2013. There was the famous campaign called 4Disco. This first was reported by the Dr. Web antivirus company. They found out the Trojan spreading and brute forcing content management system, and in particular WordPress. They call it VP Cracker. Later on this year, other security researchers and hosting providers we're talking about the global brute forcing attack, which got its name as a 4Disco because of the string found in the PE metadata. Arbor Networks did a great research on that. They actually identified 6 command and control servers related to this threat. But the interesting thing is that 4Disco was also linked to the other malware activities, let's say. So they found out that the 4Disco was not only brute forcing content management system, but it also installed the small PHP file, which is a backdoor, which called filelessman. It was designed to redirect users which is meeting specific requirements as a operation system and the browser version to the sticks exploit kit. And other security researchers found out the strong indication of hacked by 4Disco websites to the black hole exploit kit. That was very famous during that year. And other security researchers also saw that hacked websites by 4Disco were used by the SteelRat botnet, which was launching its spam campaign. The next year that we are going to cover is 2014. And it brought us Mayhem botnet. It was first reported by malware must die team in their blog post and Twitter handle, and later on Yandex company did the research on the Mayhem, and they found out interesting thing about it. So it's a modular botnet. It has 6 modules. And all of them are related to brute forcing or crawling. So there are 3 modules relating to the brute forcing particular, including brute forcing FTP accounts, and 2 others are just related to the crawling on IP on the URLs. The Yandex experts in their paper mentioned that Mayhem is actually a continuation of 4Disco, which we found really interesting. There are other things happening in 2014 which is worth to mention. First, there was the attack on the hackers exploited for the first time XML RPC call. and in particular wp.getUserBlogs. This attack is being made possible because many calls in the WordPress XML RPC implementation require username and password. The second thing that happened in 2014 is not strongly related to brute forcing, but it was the vulnerability in Mail Poet plugin of WordPress. This is a very popular plugin. It was downloaded around 1,500,000 times. And the bug which was discovered allows the attacker remotely upload any site, anything on your web server with no authentication, with no username and password, basically. It was heavily abused by the campaign called EI Test. It's still active. It's known by delivering ransomware, and it was part of the infrastructure of different exploit kits as well, and adware, anything. So it still works. And later this year, security researchers from F-Secure found out that all sites that they used by EI Test were WordPress, and they also, attackers were using brute forcing simply to obtain access to the login pages of WordPress, and then particularly use them in the activity of EI Test. So the next year brought us several other interesting examples of malware. First is the Athra. This was reported by the WordSec security researcher who was experiencing the brute forcing attack on his personal WordPress site. He found out that all IPs are coming from Italy, and all of them belongs to devices. He starts to dig in, and he found out that all IPs belongs to the Athra routers. So the routers had the default password, which was apparently abused by the hackers, who then taken advantages and installed the malware on the routers, which launched the brute forcing attack. And Brian Krebs, during that year, at the same time, posted a blog post saying that infamous Lizard Squad hacking group was knocking offline different websites, and apparently there is a strong indication of Lizard Squad using Athra vulnerability or default passwords to power off their DDoS tool. The other thing that happened in 2015 is the appearing of CMS catcher malware. So Veronica Valeras, who is also co-author of this research, she was studying Gamaru Andromeda botnet, and she let it run for 30 days in a sandbox, and after 14 days, she found out that the bot delivered a new payload. And that new payload, actually, she called it CMS catcher. It was designed to simply brute force WordPress sites. So the bot obtained the file, which contains 1,000 sites, approximately, and it tries to brute force it with a common combination of passwords the user is using. And during the 4 days of capture, she was able to obtain 300 files, which contains around 220,000 sites out there. So it's quite a big for one bot. And the last malware, which we're going to cover in 2015, is a Trolldash. This is a ransomware. You don't expect ransomware to do brute forcing. This one is doing exactly this. After encrypting users' files, it's just obtaining the new payload, and it starts to perform brute forcing. The next year is 2016, brought us 2 interesting events. One of them was the report about the Ukrainian ISP, which was unknown and which launched around 1,000,065 attacks per day. In fact, most of the information that was about this ISP was abuse reporting in Google. So for the brute force traffic originating from the 6 IPs from this unknown ISP was larger than the entire brute force traffic coming from OVH, Rostelecom, and GoDaddy put all together. Later this year, Word Defense published a blog post about botnet called Chicken Kiev. And this is the botnet just, doing different malicious activities and using for that WordPress sites. And they mentioned that probably the access to these websites were obtained via brute forcing. And they linked it with the activity of this unknown ISP provider coming from Ukraine and responsible for 1.65 million attacks. 2017 brought us another malware, including Sutterbot, that we're going to cover later. And this is the Stantinko. It was discovered by ESAT. This is the modular botnet, which is responsible for injecting ads in browsers and click fraud. But it also has an interesting plugin, which is called Brute plugin, self-explanatory. It's only it's performing brute forcing and mostly dictionary attack because it obtains the list of passwords from the command and control server. So as we can see, the different malware appeared in the different time in history. They are very, the brute forcing or the attack that they are doing is very simple. It is simple, it's automated, and it works. Otherwise, the other malware would not design specific plugins or modules to brute force it. It still works, it's still successful. To look at the similarity between brute forcing malware, we choose the Trojan called Sutterbot. It got the coverage in media in 2017, but we found out that Sutterbot was actually quite an old malware. We discovered that it's first created in 2013. So by searching in Google, we found out that there is a blog post on the forum where users saying, hey, my girlfriend got infected and she downloaded something from torrent. And he was very nice, so he posted a link on VirusTotal. And if you guys have an access to the VirusTotal intelligence, you know that you can go there heuristically, see how many antivirus vendors were detecting the malware when it first was uploaded. So that was detected back in 2013 as a backdoor Hydra loader. But if you go to the 2017, it actually belongs to Sutterbot. So Sutterbot is a modular botnet. It has 4 modules, backdoor, downloader, web crawler, and brute forcer. We are going to cover today mostly web crawler and brute forcing module. So the infection starts spreading when the user is searching in search engines, is searching for the pirate software or movie. And the URL pattern of the infected torrent looks like this. I highlighted it in here. When the user starts torrenting and then downloading the file of the movies and then the installer codec and the text file saying, hey, you need to run the installer. And when the user runs the installer, it gets the error saying, that the installer that you are trying to use is corrupted. But actually, during that time, it invokes Sutterbot, and the host is becoming the part of the Sutterbot network at that time. So after that, the bot starts crawling. For crawling, it's using 3 search engines, Google, Bing, and Yandex. So since the bot is communicating in a clear text, we were able to find out what words bot is searching in the search engines. And so this is the example of the search in Bing. You can see the bot is searching combination of 3 words like makers, manage, manual, like very standard. And then search in Google are pretty much the same. We designed we collected the whole words from the search engines and did the cloud of words, let's say. So here is you can see that, for example, the word beauty in Bing was was searched like 210 times, and then the next popular Google 111, and so on. So the example in Google looks pretty much same, so the list is almost identical. However, the Yandex stands out. We don't know why, but bot is searching for combination of letters in Yandex. This is just a small example. It's lots of combination of letters, but I cannot put them all on the slide, obviously. After the bot collecting websites, it starts to perform the check if the sites are running on WordPress. It's simply doing the GET request to the URL to the vp./login.php to identify the login panel. And after successfully identify the sites running on WordPress, it's starting brute forcing. So it's using for brute forcing XML RPC call, and in particular vp.get users blogs. It's using as a username the domain name of the site, and the password is the one that obtained from the command and control server. It was reported before that the bot is using that combination all the time and only one password. And the bot is trying to brute force only one site once. So tries, I don't know, the password magic to some site and then move to the next one. Yes, we observed this kind of behavior. We called it standard credential combinations. Here you can see the password is still magic, and it's trying to brute force some site. And I need to mention here that all examples that you see today in this presentation are coming from one capture, which was happening for 5 days in a sandbox with no user interaction or browser activity. So we observed that the bot is actually doing non-standard credential combination. So in this example, you see that the Russian site is being brute forced with a particular different username, and the password changed from magic to swimming. This is a very interesting example, especially for me. I'm a native Russian speaker, and the name of the site means water canal. So the password is swimming. I don't know if it's a joke, or it's a coincidence that it just happened like this. And the second interesting thing is that the username used for the brute forcing is actually a real username. So we don't know, but we assume that the bot is performing an enumeration scan. So it's trying to, there is the possibility to do enumeration scan and to identify user data by requesting numerical IDs. So for example, you are searching like author equals 1 up to 1000, and you can get real usernames there. So this is actually a real username. So we probably think that the bot is performing an enumeration scan. We also found out that one site is actually brute forced more than once, and more than with one password. So for example, here is the Romanian site. At 2 p.m. was brute forced with the password Makito, and at 6 p.m. it was brute forced with the password system. So since the bot is communicating in a clear text and sending the attack via the post request, we were able to collect the whole passwords that bot was using during the 5 days of capture. And there is an interesting password distribution, let's say. So I'd expect that on the first place you will see something like admin or admin 123, but it's Pericles. It's like stands out here. It's not very common, I'd say. And also we try to see if the bot is using standard dictionary, the password dictionary. We were not able to find online the available list of passwords, so we assumed that bot is using customized password list. Here I did the breakdown for 20 top passwords tried by the bot, and you can see that Pericles was used almost 50,000 times. And there are other interesting words that I'm not going to pronounce here, but for example, you can see that the pericles was used more than, for example, root 123, which is, I found very interesting. The bot is also trying to brute force everything. It's not trying to, avoid some famous sites. It's trying to probe Quora and Giphy and Snapchat and even Twitter if it's running on WordPress or not. So we were curious if the attack is targeting particular country or not, and we did a breakdown on the top-level domains, and the attack is global because there is no particular country like targeted to stands out. The most TLD was probed, let's say, it's .com. The high number is like 500,000 and a half explains that WordPress also hosting free blogs. So you can create a free blog and you get the, name of the blog .wordpress.com. So probably that's also that's why the number is so high. We were curious about the infrastructure of the botnet. We started with the 4 IP addresses of the command and control servers, and we were using Maltego to pivoting and found out more possible websites involved. And turns out the infrastructure became really big. It doesn't fit in on the slide, but if you guys are interested, I can send you the whole file so you can study it. Thanks to Maltego, we were identified some old domain names which were used in 2015 and 16, and we noticed some version change. So here you can see the free URLs in the 3 different years. And in 2015, you can see that I highlighted the pattern here, so it's always WordPress.php, some pattern, and then v equals 1, and then in 2016 this is almost identical except the different domain name, but 2017 you can see it changed. It got WordPress became caucusdriver.php and the version became equals 3. So by looking at these domains, we were able to find out that one of the domain has linked to email address. This was only the one record. It belongs to the email listma7653@yahoo.com. So after that, there is no other activity or like linked domains to the email address. So let's take a look at the connection sequence. When the bot starts, the infection started, it's checking the connectivity. It connects to the Google first, and after it gets okay, it starts, it contacts the first CNC. This CNC is hard-coded because there was no other, there was no user interaction, so this domain was connected right after the connectivity check. And this domain, the GET request to this domain are coming every 2 hours from the infected host, and POST request from the infected host to this domain coming every 10 seconds. So we assume that the bot is, the host is reporting some information to the bot every 10 seconds via the POST request. After that, the crawling started, and the bot is searching in search engines in Bing, Google, and Yandex, the combination of words and letters. And shortly after, it contacts the second CNC via the DNS request. The response comes in the DNS text record, and it's encoded string. And this encoded string belongs to, it is a location of the third CNC. During the capture, we were able to see, for the 5 days, we were able to see only that the bot is contacting second CNC only once. So the third CNC infected host sending only POST requests to this server every 16 minutes. We assume that this CNC used only for reporting. And the fourth CNC was contacted only once via the GET request, and it was delivering binary. Also, the third and fourth CNC are sharing the same IP addresses. So they kind of split the infrastructure where the one domain is just dedicated to the reporting, and the other one is just delivering binaries. So we were able to obtain different command and control servers of the SATA bot, and we noticed some pattern in there. First, we called it as a lazy admin approach, because we found out that all of these categories have repeating some word. So for example, we divided them in the 4 groups: force, master, slave, and boom. And in force domains, basically those ones which are related to, which were hard-coded, which the boss is contacting for the first time. And master ones is the one, these ones are using by the DNS and delivering the location of the third CNC. Slaves ones are used for reporting, and boom ones are linked to the torrent trackers. There are other groups of domains which we were able to identify. They are also sharing some pattern in here, as well as the different torrent trackers, location of different torrent trackers. So at the end, I'd like to, we were looking for the way to look at the botnet, like on the command and control server infrastructure. So Yindra Karasik created a visualization for us. This is the visualization of communication of command and control server SATA bot. For that, we extracted all communication to the CNCs, to the pickup. Then pickup was parsed and extracted to the CSV format. And then by Gelfi, the algorithm, it was the visualization created. I put the link to the Indra's website, so you can guys check it. He has an amazing visualization project out there. So I briefly explain you. This is the very high-level overview of the communication. So by letter A, this is related to the infected host, and the big black circuits are basically the timestamp of the connection. It's always coming from the source to destination and from destination to the source. So the A is the infected host, D belongs to the torrent tracker, C is the C connection. As you can see here, this is this pink line from coming from A to C. This is basically the reporting coming from the host to the command and control server, which was used for reporting. So this is kind of like a post request coming from the host. And the red one is the updates, which was delivered by the fourth CNC. So since there are 2 domains sharing the same IP, this is kind of self-explanatory. And then we can see the connection between A and B. This is the hard-coded command and control server. So it gets some updates via the GET request, and then it's also posting every 10 seconds to the back to the CNC. So by looking at the SATA bot, we were thinking about how better to detect it. And there are several ways how to do it. So brute forcing attacks are, basically there is 2 types of brute forcing attack, is vertical and horizontal. In the vertical brute forcing attacks, one host is trying to contact the one website all over again and trying the different combination of passwords to it. It's very easy to spot from the point of the view of if you have a WordPress site. You probably see, you can see that one IP is constantly trying to log in. So you can implement this simple counter and say, like, for example, okay, after 5 times you try to connect to me, I block you. From the point of view of if you are a defender, it's also easy to detect. You could probably use the IDS rules for that, or you can hunt for these kind of attacks in the CM. On the proxy logs, you see that infected host is trying to connect all the time to some different admin to the admin panel of the WordPress site all over and over again. And horizontal brute forcing attacks are more sophisticated. They usually, instead of so one single computer is trying to brute force multiple WordPress sites only once. So if you have a WordPress site, you probably, it's better if you have some security plugins. They are really good out there and really helpful But from the defender point of view, you probably, ADS is not the best solution. It can bring lots of false positives. You can hunt for this activity in CM, obviously. On the proxy logs, you would see that the infected host tries to connect to multiple thousands of login panels of WordPress site. But what we think is best solution is behavioral analytics. So you identify two types of brute forcing and then apply automation on that. And you don't need to look at that again. So you're probably wondering, so why should I care? Let's look at the bigger picture. Then the massive attempts to the login, to the WordPress sites can be a start of the most sophisticated attack. We saw that routinely that exploit kits are using hacked sites in their infrastructure. As well, it's a starting point of mostly all malware out there. This is, think about it, like one small site can just be spreading or infecting thousands of users. This is very important. And what did we learn today? We know that content management systems are being brute forced probably from the very beginning of the creation. The attack is still successful, it still works, since the user is still using weak passwords or outdated software or just not even changing password at all. We also know that the WordPress site, or like any actually site, is probably the important component in the malware ecosystem. And during our research, we actually didn't find a good research on the brute forcing attacks, even though the attack itself is very old. And it's really hard to measure the successful rate of this type of attack. So how many sites were brute forced, how many attempts were successful. This is actually applies to the future work of our research. We are going to publish a paper at the end of this year where we're going to cover more information, obviously more malware and more details about the Satterbot, and the three major things that we're going to focus on is to measure the success rate, so to identify the successful logins, and then we're curious how often the password changed, since we know that the bot is changing the password. And the third thing is the follow the hack, let's say. So we are curious to find out if the hacked WordPress sites were used by some malware, for example. So that's our future work. So I put the link of the Satterbot pickup and other data set in here, and you can find it on the stratosphere.org. And search it by Satterbot there. We are releasing the data probably today, so you can be able to find it. So if you have any questions, I'm here to answer you. Thank you.